My wife's parents called a family meeting. You owe us for everything. That's just what family does, they said smiling. My wife gulped, then murmured. Even my therapy? I slid a folder across the table. Itemized expenses. Every dollar back, with interest, I said. Her dad turned red and yelled. You're ruining this family. It was an early spring afternoon, one of those days where the air felt like it hadn't made up its mind about winter being over. The sun was out, but there was still that stubborn chill riding the wind, the kind that made you reach for a sweater even though the calendar said April. I was sitting in the backyard, sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped Cubs mug, listening to the soft hum of the city in the distance. The neighbor's dog barked twice. A plane cut across the sky. Everything was calm, ordinary, comforting. Then Anika came out, barefoot, phone in hand, and I knew something was wrong. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, the way people stand at the edge of a diving board when they've suddenly remembered they're afraid of heights. Her shoulders were tense. Her eyes flicked between me and the phone. They want to have a family meeting, she finally said quietly. I looked up. Who? My parents. Tonight. It didn't feel like a question. It was already decided. Vernon and Eloise had summoned us like they always did, like royalty calling in their subjects. And like always, Anika obeyed, because that's what she was raised to do. She didn't meet my eyes when I asked what it was about. Just mumbled something about some important things they want to go over, and probably just estate stuff. But her tone didn't match the words. There was a quiver under it. Something unsettled. I let it go, but not because I believed her. I let it go because I didn't want to make it worse. By 7, we were pulling into the narrow driveway of her parents' split-level house in Evanston. The place hadn't changed in years. Same weather-worn shutters, same faded garden gnome by the porch, still missing its left ear. The interior smelled like lemon cleaner and stale secrets. The table was already set, but not for dinner. No plates, no food, just water glasses, a single bowl of breath mints, and a manila envelope placed deliberately at the center of the table, like it was waiting to speak. Vernon stood as we entered, like he was chairing a board meeting. Eloise gave Anika that same tight-lipped smile she always wore, the one that never reached her eyes. They didn't even pretend to exchange small talk. We've asked you here because it's time to talk about something long overdue, Vernon said. His voice had that overly calm tone that always made me brace for impact. Anika reached for my hand under the table, her fingers cold and clammy. We've kept track of everything, he continued, pulling the envelope toward him. Everything we've done for you over the last decade. All the support. Financial, emotional, logistical. And we think it's only fair, now that we're heading toward retirement, that you take some responsibility for that. He said it like it was a favor, like he was giving her a chance to step up. I watched Anika's face drain of color. She blinked, then blinked again. Wait, what? Eloise jumped in. This isn't an attack, darling. This is about fairness. About reciprocity. About being adults. You're not children anymore. The envelope was opened. Papers were slid across the table. A spreadsheet. Multiple pages, stapled neatly. Labeled. Indexed. Interest rates. Date stamps. They had logged everything. Every gift disguised as support. Every dollar sent during hard times. Every therapy session paid for. Every Target run where they picked up groceries just to help. And they'd calculated a total. They weren't asking. They were expecting. Like a bill collector at the end of a long grace period. Then came the sentence that pierced whatever disbelief was left. Even my therapy? Anika whispered, her voice so faint I almost missed it. Vernon didn't flinch. It all counts. I hadn't said a word yet. I was just watching her fall apart in slow motion. Her entire childhood, every scraped knee and congratulatory hug, every holiday, every phone call, all of it suddenly retroactively charged with interest. It took everything in me not to explode. Instead, I reached into my bag, pulled out a blue folder I'd prepared weeks ago. Call it intuition, or just experience. I figured this might happen, I said quietly, and slid it across the table. This is what we've paid back. Direct transfers, covered expenses, shared costs, plus interest, your rate. Vernon barely looked at it. His ears were already red. This isn't how family works. I raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? You're ruining this family, he snapped, standing up. No, I said. You ruined it the day you put a price tag on your daughter. And then there was silence. Heavy, violent, like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. We left not long after. Anika was silent the whole ride back, staring out the passenger window as we crossed into the city. I didn't press. I knew the war that was happening inside her head. The guilt, the confusion, the grief. She was mourning people who were still alive. The next few weeks were rough. She'd retreat to the bathroom and cry behind locked doors. She barely ate, barely spoke. I'd hear her whispering to herself sometimes, late at night, sitting on the couch with old photo albums in her lap. Was any of it real? She asked me once, out of nowhere. I didn't know what to say. We'd spent years surviving together. Job losses, infertility, debt, anxiety, all of it. We held each other through it all, And for most of that time, her parents had been in the background, part of the landscape. Sometimes helpful, sometimes manipulative. But now it was like the entire foundation had cracked, and everything she thought she knew was suddenly up for review. Her parents sent emails. Long, passive-aggressive essays disguised as messages. Lines like, "We only ever did what we thought was best for you," and "You've changed since you married him." She didn't respond. Not right away. Instead, she started journaling, painting, taking long walks alone near Montrose Beach, even when the wind burned her face. Some days, she came home looking like she'd aged 10 years. Other days, she had this strange kind of clarity behind her eyes, like she was putting puzzle pieces together that had been scattered for decades. It was late May when she finally wrote back. Just one sentence. "When you can love me without keeping score, we can talk." No reply came. Not for a long time. The weeks turned into months. Summer arrived quietly that year, like it didn't want to interrupt anything. The trees filled out, the air turned sticky, and the city took on that smell it always does. Hot pavement, exhaust, a hint of Lake Michigan if you caught the wind right. Anika and I settled into a strange kind of quiet life. Not unhappy, just hushed, like living inside a pause button. We didn't talk much about her parents anymore, not because we forgot, but because the wounds were still fresh, and poking at them didn't help. She started going to therapy again, this time fully paid by us, with no silent asterisks hanging over her. Her new therapist had an office in a quiet corner of Oak Park, all warm lighting and soft furniture. Some days, she came back looking raw and exhausted. Other days, she seemed lighter, like someone who had finally remembered how to breathe without bracing for disappointment. I threw myself into work, picked up extra projects, a few home renovations, a redesign job for a struggling coffee shop near Wicker Park that I ended up doing for way less than I should have charged. Didn't matter. Keeping busy helped. Idle time brought thoughts I didn't want to wrestle with. Thoughts about what kind of people would treat their daughter like a debtor, and what that said about the years we'd spent believing they were just a bit difficult. We didn't hear from them directly after Anika's reply. Not for a while. But the silence had weight. It followed us everywhere. It showed up in her hesitation to post anything on social media. It showed up in the way she flinched when the doorbell rang. It showed up in the little things, like the fact that she stopped playing the piano, or how she'd stare at her phone sometimes, thumb hovering over her contacts, not quite able to delete their numbers. I think the part that broke her the most was the realization that they'd never truly loved her without conditions. That everything came with strings. That every kind gesture had been an installment in a ledger. It restructured her entire memory of childhood. One evening, late July, we went out to a small Italian place on Milwaukee Avenue. We sat on the patio, sipping cheap wine, watching people stroll past like nothing in the world could touch them. The sky was orange and pink, the air warm but not oppressive. She turned to me and said, "Do you think they ever saw me as a person? Or was I just an extension of them?" I didn't answer right away. I finally said, "They loved the version of you they created. The obedient, polished, grateful daughter. The moment you became someone else, someone independent, they felt like they were losing something." She nodded. "And now that I'm not useful, I'm disposable." "No," I said. "Now that you've stopped being what they could control, you're a threat." She didn't cry. She just sat there, eyes watery but still, stronger than I'd seen her in weeks. The next day, the emails started again. They were different this time. Less aggressive, more strategic. There were no mentions of repayment or itemized statements. Instead, they were filled with nostalgia. "Remember Christmas when you were 12? Your dad made your favorite pancakes. We're not getting any younger, and family is all we have." Anika didn't respond. She forwarded them to her therapist instead. But the thing is, guilt is a slow poison. It doesn't kill you all at once. It wears you down, grain by grain, like water against stone. By August, I could see it getting to her again. She started questioning everything. "Maybe we overreacted," she said one night. "You didn't," I said. "You saw the truth for the first time. That's not overreacting." She didn't argue. But I could see the pull. The way trauma makes you long for the comfort of the familiar, even if the familiar is what hurt you. We were walking along the lake one evening when she said, "Do you ever think about what it would have been like if I had different parents?" I didn't know how to answer that without sounding cruel. "I try not to," I admitted. She smiled sadly. "I think about it all the time. About who I might have been." "You're still becoming her," I said. "And you're doing it without their blueprint." Something shifted in her after that. She started reclaiming things. She pulled her old keyboard out of storage and started playing again. Simple pieces at first, then more complex. She even played the song she used to practice as a kid, the one her father always interrupted to critique. This time, she finished it. We were at a farmer's market one weekend when we saw them, Vernon and Eloise. They were at a booth looking at artisanal jams, of all things. Eloise wore a sun hat. Vernon had sunglasses on and was lecturing the vendor about pricing margins. Classic. Anika froze. Her hand tightened around mine. I could feel her heart speeding up just from her grip. They didn't see us at first. We were half hidden behind a display of fresh peaches. But then Vernon looked up. His eyes scanned, then stopped. And just like that, the air got heavier. He gave a small nod. Not a wave, just a nod. Like an acknowledgement from a former boss who'd fired you years ago. Eloise turned. Her expression went from casual to composed in an instant. They didn't walk over. They just stood there, across the market, not moving. Like they were waiting for us to close the distance. We didn't. Anika held her ground. Her breath was shaky, but she didn't step forward. Didn't wave. Didn't smile. Eventually, they turned away and disappeared into the crowd. We stood there for a while. That felt like a test, she said quietly. It probably was, I said. And then, without another word, we kept walking. Bought some honey. Looked at handmade pottery. Talked about nothing important for the rest of the afternoon. But the truth was, it stayed with us. The sight of them. The weight of everything unsaid. The years. The manipulation. The anger. It didn't just go away. And as the summer faded, I started wondering if this was going to be our life now. A slow, quiet drifting from the people who had shaped her, haunted by what could have been and what never really was. She talked less about them. But sometimes I'd find her staring at the ceiling in the middle of the night, wide awake. Or standing on the balcony at dawn, arms crossed, eyes distant. I didn't ask. I didn't have to. There were still things to be faced. Conversations we hadn't had. And choices she hadn't made yet. And somewhere, deep in both of us, there was the quiet, terrible question neither of us wanted to ask out loud. What happens when the people you love turn into strangers? And what happens if they never turn back? September rolled in with that crisp bite in the air, the kind that makes you reach for your jacket in the mornings, even though the afternoons still feel like late summer. The leaves hadn't quite turned yet, but you could feel it coming, like the world was holding its breath before letting go of something. By then, the silence from Vernon and Eloise had become a strange kind of routine. No more emails. No calls. No surprise visits. It was as if they'd retreated to their side of the chessboard and were waiting to see what Anika would do next. But even in their absence, they were everywhere. In her dreams. In the way she double-checked the lock some nights. In the way she hesitated before saying anything about her childhood, as if some invisible authority might scold her for misremembering it. There were days when she was fine. Better than fine, even. She'd come home from therapy with that flushed look, like someone who'd cried but also laughed, like she'd dug something deep out of herself and left it there in that office. She started sketching again too. Little things at first. Doodles on the corner of napkins, post-its stuck to the fridge with cartoon cats, or weird abstract shapes. But then full pages, full evenings, whole weekends spent hunched over a sketch pad with soft music in the background and a half-drunk cup of tea beside her. Other days, though, she disappeared into herself. Not physically, but emotionally, drifting through the hours with this distant look, like she was standing in a room I couldn't get into. She'd say she was tired, or she had a headache. I stopped asking questions after a while. Instead, I just sat beside her, sometimes in silence, sometimes with a hand on her back, letting her know I was there when she was ready to come back. It was during one of those quiet days, early October, that a letter arrived. Not an email, not a text, an actual envelope, cream-colored and stiff, addressed in Eloise's neat handwriting. No return address. Just Anika and Jonah, written across the front like it was an invitation to a wedding we didn't want to go to. Anika stared at it for a long time before opening it. Her hands shook slightly, but she didn't say anything. She took it to the kitchen, sat at the table, and read it alone. I stayed in the living room, pretending to scroll through my phone, trying not to listen too hard. The silence stretched out for nearly half an hour. Then she walked in and handed it to me. "Read it," she said. Her voice was flat. I did. It wasn't quite an apology, but it wasn't not one either. It was the kind of letter that walked right up to the edge of accountability and then took 2 steps back. Eloise talked about love, about mistakes, about the difficulty of parenting an independent-minded daughter. She acknowledged tensions, miscommunications, and generational differences. But there was no mention of money, no mention of the itemized list, no mention of what had really broken everything. At the end, Eloise wrote, "We hope that in time, you'll see that we only did what we thought was best, and that maybe, just maybe, there's still a path back to each other." It was signed with love, underlined. Anika read it again that night, and again the next morning. She didn't say much, just folded it neatly and tucked it into the back of her sketchbook. Then she didn't bring it up again. Weeks passed. Halloween came and went. We handed out candy to a dozen trick-or-treaters and watched a scary movie that neither of us paid attention to. There was a distance between us that night. Not big, just a thin film, like glass. I could see her, hear her, sit beside her, but not quite touch what she was feeling. The following weekend, we went to visit my parents in Berwyn. My mom hugged Anika the way moms do when they know you need it, but won't ask. My dad cracked jokes and poured too much wine and made a whole tray of baked ziti, even though it was just the 4 of us. It was loud, messy, human. Anika laughed that night. Genuinely laughed. I think it surprised her. When we got back home, she said, "Your family fights loud, but they love louder." I smiled. That's the only way we know how. She sat down on the edge of the bed, kicked off her shoes, and looked around our little room like she was seeing it for the first time. I never really had that. Not like this. We didn't yell. We didn't even disagree. We just followed orders. And now? I asked. She looked at me. Now I'm trying to figure out who I am when no one's giving the orders. There was something powerful about that moment. Something quiet but heavy. Like a door closing somewhere behind us. Later that week, she brought the letter back out. "I think I need to write her back," she said. "Not for them. For me." I nodded. She worked on that reply for 3 days. Not because she didn't know what to say, but because she wanted to say it right. Every word was chosen like it mattered. Every sentence felt like a small act of defiance. She didn't let me read the final version. She just sealed it, stamped it, and dropped it in the mailbox without a word. Then she came home, made tea, and went to bed early. That night, I stayed up staring at the ceiling. Not worried, just wondering what came next. If this was the beginning of something new, or just the tail end of something that had finally, mercifully, died. But the truth is, healing isn't linear. Some days felt like progress. Others felt like starting from scratch. There were still bad dreams. Still moments of doubt. Still flashes of guilt that came out of nowhere, like splinters you didn't know were still buried under your skin. And sometimes, they still showed up. In conversation, in memory, in small decisions that carried bigger weight than they should have. Like whether to send a birthday card, or how to answer when someone asked about family. But little by little, she started reclaiming her life. And I stayed with her through all of it. Winter that year arrived without much ceremony. No big storms or dramatic drops in temperature. Just a slow fade into cold and gray. The city dimmed a little. Everything looked washed out and brittle, like it was holding its breath until spring. Anika was different though. Calmer. More sure of herself. Something had shifted in her. Not all at once, but like a heavy coat being shrugged off after years of wearing it without realizing how much it weighed. Around mid-December, she got a reply. Another letter. Same envelope. Same careful penmanship. This one was shorter. Less emotional. It sounded more like Vernon than Eloise, even though it was technically from both. It thanked her for writing. Said they were glad to hear she was doing well. And then, very casually, tucked into the second paragraph like a throwaway line, was this: "Should you ever feel ready to talk about repaying the support we gave, know that we're always open to that conversation, in the spirit of rebuilding trust and transparency." It hit like a slap, not just to her, but to everything she had tried to reclaim. Anika laughed when she read it. Not a bitter laugh. Not angry. Just tired. "They still don't get it," she said. "They never will." I expected her to cry. Maybe to rage. But she didn't. Instead, she walked to her desk, opened her laptop, and began typing. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Making a list," she said. And she did. Not a list of grievances. Not a response letter. A list of every contribution she had made to their lives over the years. Every late-night phone call. Every time she drove out to Evanston with soup when her mom had a cold. Every birthday she organized. Every time she cleaned up after one of Vernon's long rants that left everyone drained and resentful. Every dollar she'd quietly sent when her mom's little credit card issue came up a few years ago. Every doctor's appointment she'd booked. Every ride to the pharmacy. All of it. We sat there together, going through old emails and texts. Scrolling through years of digital crumbs. Then she drafted an email. Simple. Direct. Attached the list as a PDF. Subject: "Let's talk about what's really owed." The message read: "In the spirit of rebuilding trust and transparency, I've included a breakdown of the emotional, physical, and financial support I've provided to you over the years. Please review and let me know where we stand." Then she hit send. Nothing came back. Days passed. Then a week. Then 2. On Christmas morning, a card arrived in the mail. No gift. No signature beyond Mom and Dad. Just a card with a watercolor of a snowy barn and the words, "Wishing you peace." Anika pinned it to the corkboard in her office, right above her desk, where it stayed. That was the last we heard from them. But that wasn't the end. Not really. Because revenge, as it turns out, doesn't always look like screaming matches or courtroom drama. Sometimes, it looks like rebuilding a life so solid, so rooted in peace, that there's no room left for people who once made you beg for love. Anika finished her manuscript in March. A book, not quite memoir, not quite guide, about boundaries, guilt, and the quiet war of disentangling yourself from toxic family. Her therapist encouraged her to submit it. She did. A small press in Seattle picked it up. She cried when she got the acceptance email. I did too, though I pretended it was just allergies. By the end of that year, she was doing podcast interviews, speaking to support groups, mentoring women who'd grown up with narcissistic parents and didn't know how to break the cycle. She never named her parents. She didn't need to. The truth was in the pattern, and thousands of people recognized it. The final touch? She dedicated the book like this: For the ones who stayed, thank you. And for the ones who kept receipts, here's mine. It was the most polite middle finger I'd ever seen. We moved out of the city the following spring. Bought a small house with a big kitchen and an even bigger garden out in Oak Brook. I built her a studio in the backyard with my own hands. Nothing fancy, just warm wood and sunlight, and shelves full of sketchbooks and books with spines bent from being read too many times. She calls it the quiet room. We don't talk about Vernon and Eloise anymore. Not out of anger, just disinterest. Their power vanished the moment Anika stopped seeking their approval. They became what they always were, ordinary people with extraordinary control issues. We see them sometimes, in passing, at a market, at a gallery opening. Once, even at a charity auction we were invited to through mutual friends. They nod. We nod. That's it. I think they know, deep down, that they lost something they'll never get back. Not money, not favors. Their daughter. And we gained everything. Not revenge in the way people usually think of it. Not fire and fury, but peace. And that's the most satisfying revenge of all.